Treasurer Zeifel, thank you very much for that very, very generous and kind introduction. You were fantastic, and I know of the good work that you're doing, especially on the housing. I thought that story you told was really, you know, politicians talk so often about ideas that are abstract, but when you get down to an example like that guy and the family and his impact on his family and his community, it really brings it home. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for all that you're doing for all of us across not only Missouri, but as an example for all treasurers across the country. Thank you very much. I want to thank Heather very much for inviting me, and all of you for including me today. Heather didn't mention it, and neither did the treasurer, but I come from, you know, I guess they did mention that I come from a big Irish Catholic family. And when I was asked to come out here and spend a little time with everyone, I was of course thrilled. It's the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. So when you're from a big family like ours, the first thing you do when you get a great invitation like this is you call up your siblings to rub it in, right? So I called up Maria and I said, Maria, you're not going to believe it. I've been asked out to Missouri at the annual conference, Missouri Association for Community Action Program. It's the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. Heather called me up and asked me out there, and she goes, are you kidding me? Heather called me and asked me to give the speech. I said, what are you talking about? And she goes, well, I've written 4 books, you've written only 1. My 4 are bestsellers, yours was barely a bestseller. I have 4 kids, you have 3. I'm on the Today Show, you work for Save the Children. So I hung up on Maria. And I thought it was very mean, Heather. So then I called up my brother Timmy, who runs Special Olympics, and I said the same thing. I said, Timmy, you know, I've been invited out to Missouri. It's a big honor. It's unbelievable. But Maria says she was invited before me. Do you think Maria's lying? And he goes, I don't know, but I got a message here to call Heather myself. So I don't know if I'm the 3rd Shriver or the 4th Shriver or the 5th Shriver, but I'm honored to be here. I was actually in Texas. I'll tell you one other funny story, because I'm not going to tell you whether what I just said was true or not, but I was in Texas. This is true. I got invited by Mrs. Bush, Barbara Bush, to come down there. They have the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, and Mrs. Bush raises a lot of money, and then they give it out to family literacy programs all across the country. And they have, it's a celebration of reading, so they had 3 best-selling authors, #1 best-selling authors, John Meacham, a guy named Brad Thor, and Mary Neal, and then there's me. So I'm in there and I'm feeling like a little bit of a big shot, feeling pretty good. I go out to eat lunch with President Bush and a number of Bush sons and daughters. And then we get back to the hotel. This is in Houston, and that night I'm going to talk in front of 3,000 people. So I get in the elevator in Houston, and this guy gets in there with a big cowboy hat on and the cowboy boots, and he looks at me and he goes, damn, anybody ever told you you look like a Kennedy? And I said, you know, once or twice, and the guy goes, that must make you so mad. So it's nice to be in Missouri with community action folks. That was a pretty good experience right there. But thank you very much, Heather, and thank you all again for including me, and to the treasurer again, thank you for those wonderful comments. You've had some amazing speakers here in the past, Peter Edelman and Robert Egger, Wes Moore, just to name a few, and the sessions that you've organized in this, at this conference are really amazing. Congratulations. I mean, you're bringing Robert Reich in by Skype, treasurer saying those great words, Governor Nixon here just a few minutes ago. I saw a workshop on talent management to succession planning for non-executive directors. The workshops are amazing. Community economic development for rural communities, to the basics of project management. You all are covering a lot of bases. I also noticed in there that you're going to have a superheroes costume contest and a scavenger hunt. So clearly there's some work going to happen. There's going to be a lot of fun too. So congratulations, Heather, and your team for putting together an amazing conference. I wondered on the way out here and over the last couple of weeks why I was asked to say a few words. I thought maybe it had something to do, as the treasurer mentioned, my work creating the choice program for juvenile delinquent kids in Baltimore City, or my work in the state legislature working on kids issues, or even my work at Save the Children over the last 11 years, focusing on education and health in really poor rural communities across America. But I know that I was really asked because of this book that Heather mentioned that I wrote on my dad and what I learned from him. I wrote it after my dad died. My mom had died about 18 months earlier. My uncle, Senator Kennedy, 17 months earlier. And what struck me was not the newspaper reports that said my father was a so-called great man for having created the Peace Corps out of nothing for President Kennedy, or the War on Poverty for President Johnson, Head Start, Legal Services for the Poor, Job Corps, VISTA, foster grandparents, model cities, community health centers. But what really struck me was not that those accolades, but really the accolades that came from like his two waitresses from his favorite restaurant, who waited in line at the wake and said almost simultaneously, "Your father was a good man." And they turned around and walked out of the church. The guy at the U.S. Air Counter who I saw last night at National Airport, Edwin DeBus, who waited in line at the church and said, "Your father was a good man, and even though he had Alzheimer's, some of the best moments of my career were taking him through security. He was a good man." And Edwin turned around and walked out of the church. The guy, Mr. Dove, who picks up trash in our neighborhood, Calvin Dove, parked his truck in our front yard, or the driveway there, and walked up the little driveway, and I was out front playing with two of our three kids, and he wiped his hands on his jacket and said, "Your father was a good man." And he shook hands, and he turned around, got back in his truck and drove away. And I wanted to figure out, you know, when I first heard that, I thought people were saying that he was a good man and were just trying to be nice, but I realized through the repetition of it that they meant something different. And I wanted to figure out what that meant, to be good versus to be great, and to figure out how my father did those things on the international and national stage with such joy. I mean, here was a guy that was married to the woman of his dreams for 56 years, who raised 5 kids, all of whom love him, who did the Peace Corps and the War on Poverty, who spread Special Olympics around the world with my mom, who went to Mass every day of his life, and I mean every day of his life. I remember checking into hotels all across America, all across the world, really, and the first question he always asked was, "Where's the local Catholic church and what's the Mass schedule?" And he did all of this, but he did it with such amazing joy. He was a guy that just loved to talk to the President of the United States as much as he did to the waitress, to a cardinal as much as he did to the people who served us lunch here today and who will clean up this room after we all leave here. And I realized that at that stage, at 46, being the father of 3 young children and married for over 20 years, that I needed to get some of that mojo, some of that joy in my life. So I sat down and started writing. My dad used to write me letters almost every day when I was in high school. He'd slip them under the door. When I was in college, I'd get 2 or 3 every day. And I got them right up until Alzheimer's robbed him of the ability to write. They could be about how the Baltimore Orioles were better than the Kansas City Royals. They could be about how the Baltimore Orioles are better than the St. Louis Cardinals. It could be about a book he read on Mother Teresa, or what we discussed at dinner. It could be about a book he had read by Elie Wiesel. So I read those notes and read a lot of the speeches that I had never taken time to read because, you know, he was my father and he wrote speeches and he gave them, and, you know, I just never took the time to do that. And I distilled down the 3 attributes that defined his life. And the first one was his faith in God. And it was a faith that demanded acts of hope and acts of love. And that's what the book is about. It's about a son trying to figure out how his father lived so joyfully and balanced these competing ideas and really lived such a joyful life. It was a faith, just to contextualize Dad for 1 minute, he was born in 1915. So his grandfather actually took Jeb Stuart to the Battle of Gettysburg as a 16-year-old kid. And his family fought on both the North and the South. They were from Maryland, border state. And you see that faith, that gentleman who took Jeb Stuart to the Battle of Gettysburg, Thomas Herbert Shriver, went into the priesthood after the war, dropped out, went back in, dropped out both times from being sick, and became great friends with a guy named James Gibbons, who would go on to be the second cardinal in America. And that was my father's godfather. And you see this faith coming up when my dad would write about how his family survived during the Depression. His father started a bank in the summer of '29 and lost what money the family had. He had to work himself through high school, through college, through law school. and how his faith sustained him through those very trying economic times, how he joined the Navy the day after graduating from Yale Law School before Pearl Harbor, and he then survived brutal battles, Battle of Guadalcanal and Battle of Santa Cruz, and how his faith sustained him through those battles, and how he prayed at night as his ship, the South Dakota, was lurching back and forth, and people were dying all around him. And you see that faith in work after the war when he moved to Chicago and worked with Martin Luther King to integrate the Catholic hospitals and Catholic schools. I'll tell you one quick story. Martin Luther King and my father were quite friendly, and when Uncle Jack ran for president in 1960, my father was in charge of the Civil Rights Unit. And at the beginning of that campaign, the Kennedy campaign, had been told that if Kennedy said anything positive about Khrushchev, Castro, or King, Khrushchev, Castro, or King, the governors in the South would throw their support behind Richard Nixon. So when Martin Luther King was arrested and thrown in jail a couple of weeks before the 1960 election, nobody said anything. They were worried about the racial ramifications and the political ramifications. My father suggested that Senator Kennedy just call up Coretta Scott King to express concern. The campaign said no. But my father persevered, waited in a hotel room with Uncle Jack. Last guy, Kenny O'Donnell, closest aide, goes to the bathroom, comes out. A minute later, and in that time frame, Dad said to Senator Kennedy, "You want to call Coretta Scott King?" He said, "Sure, I don't have her number." He pulls the number out, talks to her on the phone. It's over in a minute. Kenny O'Donnell comes out, all hell breaks loose. The Civil Rights Unit is closed. But a couple days later, Daddy King, Martin Luther King's father, who was one of the most influential ministers in America, who was a Republican and had already endorsed Richard Nixon, changed his endorsement, and said that if Senator Kennedy has the guts to wipe away the tears from his daughter-in-law, he was going to throw his support to Senator Kennedy. And a number of other prominent African-American ministers came out in support of Senator Kennedy. And if you look at the voting patterns, most people believe that the uptick in the African-American vote resulted in Senator Kennedy winning that election. And some have said it was a great political move by my dad, but I really think it was a move of hope. It was a guy whose family had fought in the Civil War on both sides, who 100 years from the Civil War knew some of the racial problems on a first-hand basis. And I think he thought that if Kennedy got elected, that this gesture might go some small way to help him try to heal some of the wounds in this country. So you see these acts of hope throughout his life, the Peace Corps, community action programs, Head Start. And when I look back on my dad's career, he was so proud of the fact that Governor Romney of Michigan was the honorary chair of foster grandparents. Mrs. Reagan was the honorary chair of foster grandparents. Governor Romney was the head honorary chair of Job Corps. First President Bush was so involved, as was the second President Bush, with Special Olympics. I don't think my father didn't care whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, whether you were a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim. He cared about trying to heed the gospel's call to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless, what the Jews called tikkun olam, to repair the world. And if you were interested in that repairing of the world, the story that the treasurer told, to help that family, he wanted to work with you. And I think you see these acts of hope and these acts of love throughout his life. The love, I mentioned his relationship with my mom, married for 56 years. I'll tell you one more quick story. My brother Bobby got arrested in 1970 for smoking pot. It's not a state secret, okay? I love telling this story because it agitates Bobby so much, but he got arrested and it was on the front page of every paper in the country. Uncle Bobby had died a few months earlier. Senator Kennedy was thinking of maybe running for president. My father was thinking of running for governor of Maryland. And when Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Bobby Shriver got arrested for smoking dope, it was on the front page. Bobby had long hair. It was cut that afternoon. My father was in California. I came back, and they were actually in Massachusetts at the time, and Bobby was told to walk down the hallway to my father's room. He said it was a really long walk. He said when he got there, my dad said, "Sit on the bed." He said, "Look, you're a good kid. I love you. Take responsibility for what you did, but it's going to be all right. Don't listen to what anybody else says." And that was it. And I don't know about you, Treasurer, but if I were in politics thinking of running for governor of Maryland and our 16-year-old daughter got arrested for smoking pot, think there'd be a little bit more yelling in our house. I think there'd be a lot more yelling. I think the point of it was, you know, he loved his son, and he knew that kids are going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, right, whether you're a kid or an adult. And what was really important was to give that kid a sense that he was loved at a crucial moment in his life, even if it had a negative impact on his own career. And you see that love coming out constantly. I'll tell you one more story. My daughter Molly, I just thought about it on the plane right out here, plays lacrosse, and she's not like other members of the family, you know, type A crazy, wound up, but one day I'm out there watching her 4 or 5 years ago, and she's talking to the opposing goalie. And I'm yelling, "Move, Molly, move." And after the game, I said, you know, we're walking out, and I said, "Molly, what are you doing, honey?" And I said, she goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you know, you're talking to the goalie." And she goes, "Yeah, she's so nice. We're going to go to a dance together." And I said, "Honey, you got to throw the ball at her head. You got to score." Next week, I took Dad out, and he had Alzheimer's, and he didn't know I was his 4th kid, or that was his granddaughter. He knew we had a special, you know, relationship, something different, right? And he was sitting there, it was a beautiful day like today, and I started yelling again at Molly because she wasn't moving. "Move, move." And he turned up to me about 10 minutes into it, and he said, "Hey, you." And I said, "Yeah," and I thought something was the matter. And he goes, "Did I yell at you like that when you were a kid?" And I realized that, you know, I lost more often than I won in sports. And I think, again, what he was trying to show was, look, your kid is out there doing it the best they can. You gotta love and support them. You don't have to worry about whether your daughter is gonna become a professional lacrosse player, because that's not an option. But you've gotta just support your kid. And that is the unconditional love that is so hard oftentimes, frankly, for a guy to admit it and to show that you do whatever, support your wife in whatever way she wants to, whether it's creating a crazy idea like the Special Olympics, or supporting your kid when he gets arrested for smoking pot, or whether you're supporting your granddaughter when she's not the best athlete on the field. So I'm sure you're sitting here looking at your dessert and wondering what all these stories of faith, hope, and love have to do with us here this afternoon. I know my father would have loved this event. He would have been so fired up with that list of people that have been working in community action programs for 40 years. That was an amazing list, an amazing contribution and commitment. He would have been enthralled and excited to meet with Governor Nixon and to listen to you, Mr. Treasurer, about the great work that you're doing. He would have been so proud of the fact that there are 19 community action agencies all across Missouri doing great work. And he would have been so proud of Maca's work. It does supporting each of the member agencies in advocacy, as the Treasurer mentioned, with state and with federal legislators, the professional development conferences that Maca sponsors and runs, and the assistance it provides to each of you 19 organizations to improve your communications and your fundraising efforts. And you would have loved the fight, I think, that each of you are engaged in on a daily basis, from rehabbing houses to building affordable houses to focus on senior housing, from the Head Start programs that I learned a little bit about at lunch to the work that you all do with prisoners, the weatherization programs, from helping individuals and families learn how to save and to get back on their feet, as we heard just a few minutes ago. The economic development work that community action programs are doing across Missouri is really amazing. I read in the introductory note from Heather and Pam that your history is amazing. That was a line I loved. The history is amazing, but the present's pretty amazing too. And the future is going to be even that much better because of the dedication that all of you have got to this great cause. That you strive to do better tomorrow than you did today is really it's the work of faith in action. Caring for the elderly, loving the elderly and the young, all members of society. These are really all acts of hope and acts of love. From helping families pay their bills, to running Head Start programs, to lobbying for systemic change, they are all, as corny as it sounds, they're all acts of hope and acts of love. I joked at the beginning about being honored to be here with all of you, but I am truly honored, because by asking me, a guy who hasn't written multiple bestsellers, who's not a powerful politician, who's not a titan of industry, you're really honoring my dad. You're honoring a man who fought the war against poverty and illiteracy and misunderstanding, a war that still rages on today that you all know just as well as I do. You honor a man who created the Peace Corps that was serving more people when he left government in 1965 than it is today. You're honoring a man who spread Special Olympics all around the world and who knew when he died that there were people in institutions, people with developmental differences still in institutions, not only in this country, but all across the world, cast aside and forgotten. You're honoring a guy who fought Alzheimer's and ultimately lost that battle after 10 years. You know, by a lot of definitions, my dad was not successful. But you honor him not because he was great, so-called great, or successful, but because he was faithful and he tried to do good. He tried to heed the gospel's call to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless, to repair the world in his own way. I think he understood that the ultimate goal is not money and fame and fortunes, so often the things that we in America associate with greatness. No, being good and trying to do good, that's the ultimate goal. So I really am honored to be surrounded by such goodness, by people who remind me of my mom and dad, people who try every day to heal the world, people who know how tough the fight can be, but who persevere nonetheless, people who have faith in the power of hope and love. It's an honor. It's really a blessing to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for having me.